Good evening, and welcome to the MIT Campaign for a Better World, London edition. I want to thank our local alumni clubs for helping put together tonight. This includes the MIT Club of Great Britain and Sloan 5 of London. The turnout this evening and the energy in this room tells me a lot about this local MIT community. It reinforces our mutual interest in learning more about MIT's work and the campaign for a better world. I'm grateful to MIT for the diverse and enriching experience I had. I happen to have met my husband Raj there, for which our children are especially grateful to MIT. Tonight, we're here to talk about the importance of investing in a sustainable planet. This topic resonates with me deeply as I think about my children and the world we're going to leave behind for them. We're so fortunate to get a peek of MIT's commitment to fight global climate change. Of course, this work is happening in individual labs, but there's no one person sitting in a lab, even at MIT, who's going to solve these global challenges alone. That's why it's so key that MIT's current leadership has delivered on making sure cross-collaboration isn't just encouraged, but supported. In fact, the MIT campus itself is a testing ground for new solutions, new technologies, new building approaches to address sustainability. The new Stephen A. Schwarzman College of Computing is the most significant change to MIT in over 50 years. It unifies our 5 schools horizontally in a way that makes collaboration easier and more productive than ever before. During my September campus visit, I was struck by the sheer scale and pace of change at MIT. Here's just one example, the new MIT Nano Building. I was lucky to tour the Nano Building, and I encourage you all to check it out for yourselves. It's going to foster revolutionary science and investigation at the nano level. And it can do this because it has the research equipment and facility that no individual lab could afford on its own. So no matter where your MIT home is, you can come to the Nano Building and further your research. This high-performing building is the most energy-efficient facility of its kind, and in fact, it's on track to be the first LEED Platinum cleanroom facility in the world. There's so many different facets to the work on climate change, and we can't hear about all of them tonight, but just a few, like the Abdul Latif Jameel Water and Food Systems Lab that works to secure humankind's vital resources of food and water. The MIT Energy Initiative, and it works to create low and no carbon solutions that will meet global energy needs. And MIT's 5-year plan for action on climate change, led by Professor Maria Zuber. It charges every academic discipline and every corner of our community to help solve this global challenge. We brought Professor Zuber here tonight, along with 2 other innovators, so you can hear from them yourselves. I've been fortunate to engage with several MIT leaders, visionaries, including President Reif, Treasurer Ruiz, and Provost Schmidt. We're truly lucky to have this cadre of talented, dedicated, and conscientious leaders at the Institute. This evening, I'm honored and delighted to introduce another dedicated MIT leader. He's a John C. Head III Dean and the Professor of Marketing at the MIT Sloan School of Management, who will share with us how MIT is leading the change for a better world. Please join me in welcoming David Schmittlein.
That was great. Thank you. I'm so glad you all made the time to come together and be here this evening. The fact that you're here means you already know a lot about MIT. You know that MIT has brilliant students and gives them great opportunities. You know that MIT has amazing faculty who advance knowledge. But you know, if you stopped there in just talking about teaching and research, it's a little disappointing. It sounds like a lot of other leading universities in the US and around the world. MIT is a special place, you know that. It's a distinctive place. It's a mission-driven place with a specific sense of itself and its purpose. So while students matter and faculty matter, I hope you'll agree with me that MIT relies on brilliant, creative, driven students and on innovative faculty who are impatient to have important impact in the world in order to fulfill what's always been MIT's mission, and that is to invent the future, invent a positive future, ensure a better world. MIT is a tough place. People at MIT ask themselves, if I don't do it, and the world needs it, then who will? To that point, the journalist Thomas Friedman, some of you recognize that name, spent a couple days at MIT a couple of years ago spending time with our students. And one of the things that the MIT students told him during that visit not only stayed with him, but became the title of the piece he wrote about his time at MIT. They said, Mr. Friedman, we are the people the world's been waiting for. Now more than ever, the world needs MIT people, its students, its faculty, its alumni and friends, honestly, to be the people that the world has been waiting for. If John Goodenough, who was a researcher at MIT's Lincoln Lab from 1952 to 1976 before moving to Oxford, hadn't developed at MIT the revolutionary lithium-ion battery that powers your mobile devices and electric vehicles, who would have done it? When would it have happened? John, as you may know, received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry this year. If MIT economics professors Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo hadn't developed the new economics of poverty alleviation, showing which poverty alleviation programs work and which ones don't, and why, who would have done that and when? And again, as many of you know, Abhijit and Esther received the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences this year. All across MIT, people are changing the world through ideas that are made to matter. Consider human health. MIT's advances in genomics, in new cancer therapeutics, and in new ways that are innovative in delivering health systems. MIT is improving human health. In architecture, music composition, visual arts, MIT is bringing to the world brilliant design and breathtaking artistic works. In machine learning and artificial intelligence, through MIT's new Stephen A. Schwarzman College of Computing, we're not only shaping the future of AI and computing, and not only taking a responsibility for technological leadership, but also for an ethical consciousness that's so very much needed in making sure that these new technologies serve not only profit, but serve the common good. And in tonight's theme itself, MIT's activity in addressing climate change, in solving environmental challenges, and in creating a sustainable planet is creating a better world. So in May of 2016, when it came time to name this audacious campaign for MIT, it seemed hopeful but also appropriate that we would call it the Campaign for a Better World. It was an audacious campaign in its goal. $6 billion is a lot of money for anyone, including for an institution the size of MIT. And with $5.2 billion raised so far to support bringing the right people to MIT and empowering them to do the work that makes you all proud, it required the community to come together as it never had before. This campaign has seen 100,000 gifts made to MIT. We're a numbers place, so those are some of the numbers, and I'm grateful to all of you for supporting. But the numbers only tell part of the story. There's also the narrative, because as people have been giving in this campaign, they've said back to us what we hope to hear, and that is that they see a gift to MIT as a gift to the world. I want to say thanks for the support, but I also want to say thank you for seeing MIT that way and for challenging us to fulfill the hopes and the expectations that you have of the Institute. Now, I want to talk about 3 challenges briefly in university education, and then we'll get to the heart of tonight's topic. The first of those challenges relates to the campaign itself. You know about government funding for research, especially for basic research. You know what's been happening in terms of dramatic declines. What that means over the last 10 years, and probably over the next 10 years, is the need to rely more heavily than ever on alumni and friends and supporters. And again, in this campaign, you've let us do that. I want to say thank you especially for seeing us through this more challenging time. There's a second challenge in higher education that you may have read about in the headlines, and that is people being concerned about integrity of admissions processes at leading universities. Now, this is a setting in which MIT, unsurprisingly, hasn't been the focus of negative news. But nonetheless, MIT's perspectives on admissions need to be part of the conversation and part of the contribution to better processes, more reliable processes with integrity for admissions, and also processes that lead to greater access to higher education for people around the country and around the world. And there's a third challenge for universities that I want to touch on. There have been questions about the kind of people that universities rely on as donors. MIT has been in the spotlight with some of those headlines, and not in a positive way. In the last few months, some in our community have felt sadness and frustration and anger about gifts that should not have been accepted. MIT is engaged in a re-examination of the kinds of gifts it will accept, the people from whom it will accept gifts. It's a discussion that is important about process, but it's also a discussion that's important about culture. I hope that you see MIT as a place that has a history of taking principle, turning it into analysis, and then into effective action. And I hope with me that you feel confident that MIT's examinations here will produce outcomes that are better for MIT and also better for the other universities who are looking to MIT for better standards in working with donors. Now, that topic of a place that turns principles into effective action is probably a pretty effective way to lead us into tonight's topic. You know the topic for this evening, investing in a sustainable planet. You're going to hear from 3 great scholars at MIT, and you'll have the opportunity to interact with them through the Questions Anywhere app. It's something like that. There it is. That's not exactly the title, but here's the URL. Use your mobile device, submit questions, and allow us to have a great conversation. As the evening unfolds and you get to hear from some of these folks, I hope that you'll keep 3 things in mind. First, if this evening does move you to support MIT further, please and thank you. Second, if you know people in your community, in your network, who should know more about MIT and know more about what's happening at MIT, please use what you see tonight to tell them. Because the point of this campaign is not only financial support, it is also engagement, impact, and visibility. Thank you for that also. Third, if tonight moves you, and your family perhaps, to think about your own personal decisions, I think that would be great also. So without further ado, you're going to hear from Jason Jay. Jason is a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management and directs the MIT Sustainability Initiative. You'll also hear from Alpha Jacob Arsano. Alpha is a PhD candidate in architecture and building technology. Alpha is also a researcher at the MIT Sustainable Design Lab. And first, you'll hear from MIT's Vice President for Research and E.A. Griswold Professor of Geophysics, Maria Zuber. Would you please give a warm welcome to Maria Zuber?
Hi, everybody. I thought I would start out tonight by telling you something that isn't in my official bio. So it is true that I develop experiments and put them on the top of rockets and send them into space and map the planets. And it's also true that I lead MIT's Plan for Action on Climate Change. But what you may not know about me is that I grew up as a young girl in eastern Pennsylvania in coal country. Both of my grandfathers were coal miners, and both of them suffered the effects of black lung. So the burning of anthracite coal really drove my community and was a central part of me growing up. So climate change is a very personal thing with me. We've known since the 1800s that the combustion of fossil fuels puts CO2 into the atmosphere and that the effects can be damaging. You know some of these effects. Rising sea level runs the risk of inundating coastal cities. Ocean acidification will wreak havoc with ocean ecosystems. Countless species of animals and plants will go extinct because they don't have the ability to adapt to the changing climate on the time frames that these changes are happening, because they are happening faster than at any time in history. And finally, there will be mass migrations, climate refugees who have to leave their homes and be taken in by others. So we are already seeing some of these effects happening and other effects that are happening. But I'm here tonight to tell you that I'm optimistic that we can avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Because if we look at our past, there have been countless instances in history where technological developments have moved humanity onto a better and more productive past. And then I have no reason to think that the future is really going to be any different. Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk about 3 areas of technology development that, if they are realized, could really change the trajectory on which the current Earth is with respect to accumulating CO2 in the atmosphere and climate change. Okay, the first of which is batteries. Okay, we all know about batteries. You use them to charge your cell phones, to start your car, we play our music, but batteries are key to combating climate change. We need battery technologies because in the deployment of renewable energy, one of the greatest impediments is intermittency. So we essentially need to take the power of the sun and store it for when the sun isn't shining, and we need to take the power of the wind when the wind isn't blowing. And with battery technologies, we don't need one breakthrough. We need lots and lots of little breakthroughs. We need better battery designs. We need better battery capacity. We need better battery efficiency. We need to develop batteries that are more inexpensive so that we can deploy them more. And we need batteries that are made out of common Earth materials as opposed to rare materials. Okay, the second example of a technology is carbon capture. When CO2 is put into the atmosphere, the residence time is 1,000 years. So the CO2 that has been accumulating into the atmosphere since the time of the industrial age is going to be affecting the climate for many, many generations to come. So imagine if we had the ability, when fossil fuels combust, that we could capture the CO2 right at the source, in the same way that an industrial stripper takes away pollutants at a smokestack. Alternatively, imagine if we could just suck CO2 out of the atmosphere wherever it is, the same way that a vacuum cleaner takes dirt out of a carpet. So actually, technologies for both of these are being developed, but they're not anywhere close to being cost effective, and therefore we can't scale them up. And actually, even if we could, we don't know what to do with all that CO2 once we have it. And so we need work in that area as well. And because of the fact that we don't have clean energy solutions for all the different parts of the energy system that now use fossil fuels, carbon capture has to be a part of at least our near-term solution for combating climate change. The third technology is fusion. Fusion is the process that powers the sun, and we need to bring that process down to the Earth. The fuel is hydrogen, actually a form of water, and that makes it practically free and virtually inexhaustible. Now, the challenge with fusion has always been that we need to design a device that creates more energy than the energy that's used to power it. And this is a really, really difficult challenge. But fusion would be an important contributor to limiting the change in our climate because of the fact that it doesn't put CO2 into the atmosphere and there's no radioactive waste involved. So, batteries, carbon capture, fusion. Collectively, these and other technologies, that if we had them, we would be in a very different place today in terms of limiting CO2 accumulating into the atmosphere. So what do? Well, we need investments from governments, from industry, from philanthropists, and they need to be working together with scientists, technologists, and entrepreneurs. MIT has research going on in all of these areas, and I want to particularly note in the fusion area, we have had over $100 million invested in a startup, Commonwealth Fusion Systems. And so, I want to close out tonight by returning to my own area of research interest and talking a little bit about space. What you see on the screen up here is the famous image Earthrise, which is the image that really started the global environmental movement. This image was taken by the Apollo 8 astronauts on Christmas Eve in 1968, 6 months before the first humans landed on the moon, arguably the most important and interesting technological achievement in human history. Think about what was going on the Earth at the time that picture was taken. Countries were at war. We had racial strife. We had intergenerational tension. We had economic uncertainty. And we had political turmoil. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Okay. And yet, we still did this. Thank you very much.
We all talk about how we want our homes and cities to be more sustainable. What does sustainability even mean? What does green or environmentally conscious building mean? I am Alpha Yacob-Arsano. I'm an architect and a climate engineer. I'm currently conducting my doctoral study at MIT, trying to bring simple, sustainable design solutions to builders, architects, and the general public all around the world. What environmentally conscious building means has become very important, mainly because we care a lot about mindful living and protecting the climate. But there is a situation we haven't even considered. There have been lots of advances in technologies in the building industry. And the assumption is that in the name of modernity, we should apply all those advances everywhere all the time. So what was scarcely imaginable a few decades ago in terms of regulating the climate has become a reality. For example, we can bring air conditioning to the desert, we can bring heat to the coldest part of the Arctic, and more people can be more comfortable. But that leads to an increased consumption of energy and material, and all that contributes to global warming and climate change, and we aren't paying enough attention to it. Think about it. Before the 20th century, before the discovery of air conditioning units, climate-responsive design that relied on passive strategies and vernacular construction was the norm. People opened windows to bring in fresh air and cool their buildings. Insulation materials were used in building facades to keep heat inside the building when it's cold outside. and breathing earth walls were used to keep spaces cool when it's hot. Now, in the name of technological advancement, we have gotten away from what we knew in the pre-industrial times. Even though I come from an institute that's meant to advance science, I think this is an instance where the good old days actually hold the key to the future. I first decided to study architecture in my home country, Ethiopia, and that's where I learned about one fascinating definition of architecture. It's the nexus of philosophy, art, and science. And I see the need to inject more science into architecture. Through my experience both in academia and practice, it's clear to me that we have a real problem, because right now, climate and human comfort inside buildings is impacting not just the humans in those buildings, but the climate itself. And we're ignoring all that. This has huge repercussions that we're only beginning to see. We have to stop building climate-agnostic buildings that require large amounts of material and energy. Here is an example. Now, if we look at buildings in the north and the south, they look completely similar, despite the fact that they are located in different climates. Buildings in hot climates, such as Mumbai, have similar technologies with ones located in cold climates, such as Boston, or temperate climates, such as London or Addis Ababa. And that's crazy. The desire to make better buildings is what inspired me to specialize in sustainable building design. And MIT is where I found the right program with a generous research support. With my advisor, Professor Christoph Reinhardt, we're building a simple open source web tool called Klima Plus. The tool gives recommendations on a set of sustainable design solutions for your building, and you only need very few inputs for that. You only need the location of your building and the building program. We give you suggestions on how to use natural ventilation more effectively rather than using mechanical conditioning. Additional recommendations are given on the construction, on the thermal mass and the insulation. Thanks to advancement in data science, we now have climate data for over 10,000 locations online. And that means now we can conduct studies in African and Asian context in a scale that was not possible before. And we know that we need the largest impact in locations where there would be high urbanization, such as what's happening in Asia and Africa. According to the UN report, 2/3 of world population is expected to live in cities by 2030. And urban population in developing countries is going to double. With Klima Plus, we have a never-before opportunity to design with climate-responsive design. Through science, we help protect the environment and the climate, and we help building owners save money because they will. To further maximize impact and access, in collaboration with the MIT Energy Initiative, we're building a course which would be part of an online micromasters program. Soon, a designer in X or an engineer in Y would be able to design and build with more sustainable buildings. Look, I know we're all from MIT, and we all always want to make things better. So you probably would like to learn more about simple strategies to make your home more sustainable, or you might want to learn more about the online course we offer. If that's you, come find me at the reception. I have a lot to tell you. Thank you.
On September 20th, 4 million people hit the streets around the world to raise their voices about the climate emergency. This was twice as big as any previous climate action. I'm Jason Jay, director of the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. But that morning, I got to tell you, I was dragging my heels. I had a full inbox, a lot on my plate to go marching around. But then I started getting the news reports of people coming out in force in Australia, Germany, here in London. And I thought, I've got to support the next generation. My 9-year-old son was just opening his eyes, and I went to him and I said, Vikram, I'm going to go do this climate march thing. It's going to be hot. It's going to be crowded, a lot of walking, but if you want, you can join me. And he sat up with a bit more zing than I usually see on a school morning and said, Dad, what do you think? This is the poster he made with a group of grad students at MIT in Building 9. This is us with a few thousand of our friends at Boston City Hall and our team at the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. What I heard that day, beneath the signs and slogans and the speeches by Greta Thunberg and all the Gretas and the cities that came out, was a simple message. Let's get real. The Paris Accord was a global attempt to get real. 195 countries made a shared commitment to reduce emissions and limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, ideally 1.5. That would be a lot safer world than the 4.1 degrees we'll see under business as usual. But we've got 2 problems. The first is we ran the computer simulations on the actual commitments by countries in the context of Paris, and they only add up to 3.3 degrees. We've got to do a lot better. Now, in the US, we have another problem. But we need a global political consensus about the urgency to act and to do it right. Business strategy, public policy, capital investment, we have to get them all on board. Now, here's the trick. The research shows that just showing people research doesn't work. But give people the tools to learn for themselves, and that's when things get real. That's why MIT Sloan professor John Sturman and our team of alumni at Climate Interactive developed En-ROADS. En-ROADS stands for Energy Rapid Overview and Decision Support Tool. It runs 38,000 equations instantly using the best peer-reviewed science from an ordinary web browser. And it has a pretty great array of climate levers to pull, everyone's favorite climate strategies. And instantly, you can see the results of your actions and their impact on our energy use, the mix of coal, oil, gas, renewables, and other energy sources, what that does to greenhouse gas emissions, and ultimately to temperature. With this tool, we can sit down with decision makers and explore climate strategies. So let's take Bill Gates, for example. He was a fan of advanced fusion and fission energy generation, saw it as a kind of silver bullet for solving climate change. What happens if we get a breakthrough or a huge breakthrough in advanced energy generation, zero carbon, cheaper than coal? The tool helped Gates and his team see that these new energy sources add an important part of the mix, but they take a long time to ramp up, and they do not automatically substitute for fossil fuels. So, spoiler alert, there is no silver bullet. There's no one solution, no one technology or policy that saves the day. But there is silver buckshot. Blends of different strategies that when we combine them, they get us where we want to go. Like this. Charge a price on carbon pollution. Use energy much more efficiently across the economy. Electrify transportation and heating. Eat and farm more wisely to reduce methane and nitrous oxide. Store carbon in the soils and in forests, both old and new, and that could get us to 1.5 degrees. And that's just one example scenario. En-ROADS makes the case for the ambitious, coordinated action that we need, if we get it into the hands of decision makers. So far, we've done workshops with 35 US senators, 7 US governors, 80 House staffers and members across the aisle. Last month, I went to Asia. It was incredible. In Indonesia, I ran a workshop with 110 people on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, I trained 10 people of those to be facilitators. On Thursday, one of them translated our materials into Bahasa Indonesian, and on Friday, he had run a workshop with influencers across his country. We've used this tool with corporations, private investors, business families, government agencies, high school teachers, and of course, hundreds of MIT students. It's helping us change the conversation in fundamental ways. We're even getting endorsements from unusual places like a Republican congressman. And now we need your help to get more. Take a look around. Just look around the room. We need people like us to get people like us on board. Because get this, almost every policymaker and executive that we have reached with this tool has been through an MIT alum. Someone who has opened doors, made calls, championed the work. Our community has incredible reach, but we have to use it. So let's get real. Who can you put us in the room with? And who among you can join us in bringing this tool out into the world? I want you to take out your phone, open your camera, point it at this QR code. A URL will pop up. Tap it and sign up to do 3 things. The first is load the simulation on our laptop, on a laptop, and just play. Learn for yourself. Number 2, get trained to facilitate workshops with your community and your industry. We want to train 7,000 facilitators, 1 for every 1 million people on the planet. And number 3, let us know about decision makers that you can help us reach with these simulation tools. Because this is what MIT stands for. Rigor, discipline, innovation, real action. That's how we make a better world. So thank you. I'm bringing Maria and Alpha back up on stage for the panel portion of the evening.
Okay, we're very excited about getting your questions. So as Dean Schmidtlein explained, we're going to be using the Poll Everywhere app to collect the questions that you have. So try to stump us here. Use your mobile device, share your questions with me and Alpha and Jay. And as your questions are coming in, I will start off with a couple of my own. So Alpha, let's start with you. How much uptake do you think there's going to be for the Climate Plus tool, and how much impact are you hoping it will have with the world?
So we're right now beginning in the educational setting. We're using the tool already in courses we offer at the Building Technology at the School of Architecture, but we're also incorporating it into an online course, which we hope would be used in all continents. So through that, I think we are slowly reaching out to the builders or architects or other professionals elsewhere. So I think where we would see the biggest need for construction, which would be where urbanization rate is very high in Africa and Asia, that's where we really hope and wish to see the biggest impact. And that's where we're going.
Great. Okay, Jason. What are some of the best ways that businesses can help world sustainability problems?
Sure. Well, what we see is that businesses first often pick the low-hanging fruit, the places where it's profitable to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because they're saving energy or waste in their buildings or in their logistics. And that's fantastic. We need that. Second thing is that it looks like about 80% of most companies' impacts are deep in their supply chain, at the first mile in farms and factories and fisheries and so on. And so getting traceability and visibility on that and tackling those impacts is a big one. And then the third, which is way too often neglected, is political influence. These solutions are technology solutions, they're management solutions, but they are also public policy solutions. And companies need to get active, asking for a carbon price, stable market signals that allow the market to really innovate and tackle climate and other issues.
Okay. Let's see. This can be for anybody. So what can we do as individuals to tackle climate change, from recycling to reducing waste?
I can. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, just a simple example could be thinking about how we use our set points in the house for heating or cooling, or it could be about being mindful about closing and opening the windows at the right time, or adapting our clothing in terms of really how we go about our everyday. I think that really impacts at the aggregate scale, impacts how much energy we consume.
Yep. I think it's really important for people to look for what we call co-benefits, strategies that give you some benefit that you enjoy while tackling an environmental issue. A lot of people are buying Teslas because it's a fast car, right? As just one example, but I think, so another example is substituting video conferences for air travel. It's a less work-life balance strain on your family to be traveling, and saves the carbon on the flight. So I think that's a simple one. And then moving away from beef to other forms of meat and other vegetarian type diets turns out to have a bigger impact than most people realize.
Yeah. Okay, Jason, here's one for you. What countries do you see taking the lead in addressing the climate crisis, and is there something we can learn from them, based on maybe the deployment of your tool?
Sure. So that's a great question. There's a map that you can find on the web where you can look at the climate impacts and both sort of which countries are causing climate change and which countries are most affected by climate change. And so you can see the sort of injustice of the fact that the US emits a lot, Australia emits a lot, we're not that vulnerable relative to Bangladesh or Ethiopia that have very significant impacts, even though they're not emitters. But there's a couple of countries where there's simultaneously very large emissions and very large impacts, and I would put China squarely in the middle of that. So if I was going to just bet my money on where major climate solutions are going to come, I'd look at China. They're experimenting with carbon trading between provinces. They're investing seriously in the electric vehicles industries. And I think we'll see more. Now, I think that they're also at the same time building coal plants both inside and outside their boundaries, investing in coal-fired generation around the world. And so, everybody's got a lot more to do.
Yeah, so let me just add on to the China situation. So China rightly claims that it wants to be at the lead and show leadership on the deployment of solar and other clean energy technologies. But the coal plants that they're building along the Belt and Road, which is their trade connection to
Exactly.
the rest of Asia and Europe, they're building coal-fired power plants, which the analyses of that indicate that it would stand to negate all of the gains that they're making in their renewable investments.
Yep.
And
actually, Japan is in a similar place where their own footprint is not bad, right? There's CO2 emissions per capita domestically, but their handprint in terms of their investments in coal technology outside the border is very substantial. And one of the things we did with the En-ROADS tool was I went to Tokyo and got to meet with some of the senior decision makers on energy policy for Japan to tackle exactly that question.
Yeah, and I think we don't want to call out China or Japan here because I think every country can look
Absolutely.
at what their strategy is, and we can always find places for improvement. But
we're Americans after all.
Yeah, no kidding. But it's important to talk about it and to just indicate how challenging it is if you have a population that wants greater access to energy. And
Yes.
so in both these countries, that's an issue. Let's see. All right. How about this one? As electric cars grow in supply and demand, I understand there's a big problem regarding the disposal of batteries in an environmentally friendly way. Can you please elaborate on where we are with this and how it could be more successful? Will the car industry catch up in time? So,
this is an area I don't know a whole lot about, but we recently had Yetming Chen from the Material Science Department come and speak to a group of our alumni who work in renewable energy finance. And he works on fundamental battery technologies. And we posed exactly that question to him about, what about the end of life of batteries? Is there a good recycling pathway? And he felt very confident that there were going to be good recycling pathways for most of the chemistries that we're currently working on. Now, he's somebody who's developing new battery technologies, so you can take that as you will, but I think he understands some of the fundamental chemistry and the economics of those chemistries reasonably well. But it's not something that I have expertise on.
Yeah, so actually that was one of the points that I raised in my talk of using common materials as
Yes.
opposed to really rare materials that are toxic. So actually a great deal of the research that is going on in MIT's material science department and chemistry and chemical engineering is actually the replacement of toxic materials and toxic processes with processes and materials that are environmentally sustainable and environmentally friendly. Okay, and this is not limited to batteries, but this is a huge
Yes.
area of research.
Yeah, and I'll call out one other MIT scholar. Elsa Olivetti is a professor in material science and engineering who is one of the first people to kind of move up the ranks there, looking at what are called material systems. So looking at the life cycle analysis, looking at the flows of materials across their life cycle in order to be able to choose the right materials for their disposability, recyclability, and favorable characteristics at the end of life.
Yeah. Okay, so here's one for me. How do you get developing countries to skip the carbon step and develop using renewable energy and sustainable practices? So actually, it's interesting. We had 192 countries sign the Paris Agreement, which means that all countries, including the developing countries, want to be part of the solution and recognize their responsibility in being part of the solution. Okay. However, let's look at where we are on this. So, countries in the Western world grew economically prosperous by having energy to fuel their manufacturing growth, and this was largely fossil fuel energy. So, developing countries want their people to have the same standard of living that the rest of the world has. And while they signed the Paris Agreement and they would like to have renewables and they want to have clean air, they are going to get their energy in the cheapest way that they can get their energy. So it is really incumbent upon the developed world to think about how we take these clean energy solutions that we're developing and to deploy them in these countries. So India, for example, is very coal-rich, and in fact, it's lignite, so it's just one step above peat. I mean, it's worse than bituminous coal in terms of the carbon intensity of it and in terms of emissions. And so a big one of the, when we started the Plan for Action for Climate Change, the Energy Initiative decided to change their portfolio over from going with individual investigator projects to a series of low carbon energy centers. And for the reason that we had to realize that there was going to be a transition in fossil fuels, carbon capture became an important part of that. But in all of these low carbon energy centers, our colleagues at MITI invited in membership and representation from developing countries so that we could get an understanding of what their challenges are. Because sitting on the MIT campus, we don't know the challenge of somebody in India or Africa in terms of trying to get energy to their village. And so going out and reaching out to people in those areas to work with them, not just give them a solution, but work with them in terms of what is a kind of solution that is going to work in their particular area. And a lot of these solutions are going to have to be customized to the particular area. So that is a way that we are going about trying to solve that problem. Okay, let's see.
If I could just ask, I mean, Alpha, you mentioned doing work in Africa and Asia where there's rapid urbanization. Are you seeing uptake of some of these passive building technologies or green building technologies? What's that? What are those little leapfrog opportunities that exist?
There are two ways to look at this, I think, at the moment. For instance, the case in Addis, there is a need for a lot of construction. So people are really trying to build as much as possible. and there is no time to go back and think about what's passive or what's low energy, even though the climate is not really pressing. It's not really troubled with heating demand, or some places have cooling demand. So much is being built without thinking about it too much. But now I see a slight shift where some people are picking the interest. Okay, let's think about what's the difference between having a single pane window or a double glazing window. What's the effect? Even asking those questions and trying to understand the impact of each decision is yet picking up. But I see there is a huge space for further engagement and further research. Maybe to that end, I'd like to mention in April, we did a workshop in Ethiopia, a couple of us from our lab. We went there, we engaged with the university in Ethiopia. We made it a collaboration between MIT and Addis Ababa University. And we brought students and architects and people from the government to talk about these things. And it was still high-level conversation. Which was very indicative for us that we really would like to do more of that and really dive deeper into the details and understand further.
Yes, yes. MIT's got great convening power to be able to bring people like that together. Yeah.
Okay, Alpha, here's another one for you. Is a 3D printed home more environmentally friendly?
That's a tricky question. Because there are usually two sides when we think about buildings. There is the embodied energy, which accounts for the energy we use or the emissions associated with the process and the materials used. And then there is the operational energy, which is associated with the performance of the building itself. So a very well-built building where we invested more and maybe we used a specific kind of material, then during operation it could be more efficient because it's not leaking air. It could be close to these net zero buildings or highly efficient. So in that regard, it would be we can design it in a way that it has a very well-controlled indoor environment and it becomes more comfortable with little energy. On the other hand, we have to pay attention what kind of material did we use to produce the 3D printed material. The machines we use, even the material itself, that's directly involved. So I think we have to look into it in detail to identify. I don't think it's possible to say one or the other directly.
Okay, Jason, here's one for you. How do we scale up sustainable solutions when solutions such as recycled or bio-based plastics are more expensive than virgin materials? What's the right approach to encourage their adoption?
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a great book called The Green Bundle, which is a piece of research about marketing sustainability and when will people pay a premium for a more expensive product because it's greener or more responsibly made. And the thesis of The Green Bundle is that you have to be bundling the sustainability features with something that the customer wants. That's going to provide real value to the customer experience. Whether that's, I use the example of a Tesla car, just as a simple one, which is that it's fast, it's light, it's high tech, it upgrades itself overnight. Those are the things that excite the drivers, and by the way, it emits zero tailpipe emissions. So you have to design products intelligently so that you're really providing some benefit for the user. Nike learned this the hard way. They made a shoe called the Trash Talk, where they sewed together bits of old shoes, and it didn't sell because it wasn't providing any value to the athletes. But when they came out with the Flyknit, where they 3D printed essentially the upper of the shoe from a single thread, it's lightweight, it provides more breathability, it's a higher performance shoe for the athlete, and zero waste on the factory floor. So I think that's one critical strategy. The other is that there are some things where we just need public policy to sort of set product standards. The person who's running the coal plant is not excited about their scrubber for sulfur and nitrous oxide emissions, but they do it, and so we don't have acid rain and we don't have as much air pollution in the States because cap and trade for SOx and NOx got us there. So I think those are the two strategies.
Okay. All right, here's one that I'll take. Do you believe that the conversation around pushing more advanced technology distracts decision makers from leveraging current technologies to mitigate climate change. So it's interesting. So there are some people in the U.S. I don't really know if this is happening here, who are actually prominent people who are making statements that we have all the technology that we need to battle climate change. All we need is the policies. Okay? And so we don't really need to invest more in the technology. So of course we do need the policies. No doubt about that whatsoever. But the fact is we don't have the technologies that we use. So at the beginning of our climate action plan, we had a group of students who were protesting because they felt like our goals for the climate action plan were not sufficiently driving and ambitious enough. And actually, I agree with that. We need to really completely turn it up. But they demanded that the campus be carbon neutral by 2050. So we said to the students, okay, well, we don't know how to do that, but you can help us. So we put in a course on how to make the campus carbon neutral by 2050, and had different groups of students, we've taught this now 3 years, come up with strategies for getting to carbon neutrality by 2050. And so the renewables kind of level out at about 2030. You're doing, assuming you get better batteries, which we are making advances in that, between 2040 and 2050, you can't do any more to get to the last 15% of what you need. So every student group put either fission or fusion in to get you to the last part of it, okay? And we're not going to get there with current fission technologies. There are technologies actually in nuclear fission where that are molten salt reactors that if we develop them properly would actually use spent nuclear fuel rods as the fuel, and these reactors can't melt down. Okay, so you're actually solving two problems there. You have a reactor that can't melt down, and you're actually using the spent fuel rather than just burying it someplace that doesn't want to have it. And then on the fusion side, there have been different approaches to fusion. The one that the MIT startup is using is actually taking advantage of, there was a Nobel Prize given for high-temperature superconductors in the late 1980s, but it is only now that physics discovery is being translated into developing developing magnets that have high enough fields to actually confine plasmas to the point where it looks like we could actually get a fusion device that will work. Okay, so we can't get there without the new technologies. So MIT actually has been advocating, let's do as much as we can to try to positively influence policy while we're developing the technological solutions that are going to be needed to close that gap.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're now at the 5-minute point, and so I'm going to ask you both one final question on this topic before we move to the reception, and we'll be happy to take more questions because there's lots and lots of questions here. So all of you, both of you, have had a lot of contact with MIT students, and what are you hearing from them? And is this a priority in what they're studying? They have many different majors. Is a priority in their research, and how active are they on the campus about this? So Alpha, why don't you start us out here?
Sure.
You're one of them, but you have contacts with many others.
Definitely.
Are you typical?
No. For example, in our research group, most of the PhD programs tend to touch upon the effect on climate change or carbon emissions when they try to evaluate their solutions. So I think in the research, it's highly embedded in most of the courses that are offered in the building technology. That's usually one of the topics. In addition to that, I see student groups which are trying to get together and speak about these issues. I see more conferences every time. I myself was part of a competition, a very large competition, which was held a year and a half, which was interdisciplinary, and it was about changed climate, which had a huge impact, I think. It brought so many people together. So at the institute level, I see so many activities going on, and what's fascinating for me is even more people take it personally, just like the first question that was raised here. Everybody's asking, what can I do personally? People, think about how they commute. I know so many people pay attention to what they eat, even when we, get food for conferences or for meetings. That's always in our mind. So I think it's really gating in the everyday life, and it's growing.
Great. Jason.
I mean, the populations that I have the most exposure to are master's level students from across MIT, because that's really the constituency that we serve with the sustainability initiative. So that's MBA students at Sloan, executive students around Sloan, dual degrees with engineering, urban studies and planning students from across campus. And what we've seen is just an incredible tailwind for work on sustainability. When we started the sustainability certificate, which is a kind of a master's, you can think of it as a minor for master's students across MIT. In 2011, we had 17 people finish it. And then last year, we had 55. So there's been very steady growth, largely owing to Bethany Patton, who's my colleague, who has led a lot of that student engagement work. And what we've seen is that core of people, so there's now 297 of them out in the world, are now a cohort of alumni who are coming back and bringing cool projects that are attracting more students to want to get involved. We know that about a third of Sloan students, as they're graduating, have taken 3 or more courses in sustainability. And so it really is a vibrant part of that master's level conversation. And they're all interested in the topics that we're talking about, the intersections between entrepreneurship and innovation and investment around new technologies, changing the way big existing corporations operate in their supply chains, and in these transformations of public policy and the public conversation about climate change and sustainability, and also the broader social issues of inequality, and sort of what they think of as sort of a socio-political unsustainability that makes it all the harder for us to tackle these big issues. So MIT is a very activated group of people. They're problem solvers, and they want to get on top of these issues in their careers and, as you said, in their personal action.
Okay, so we are unfortunately out of time here, but I want to thank you all for coming tonight, for the fantastic questions. And now I invite all of you to stay and join us for a reception downstairs. And of course, any of us will be happy to answer any of the questions that you sent in that we didn't get to. So thank you very much.